How do you find a career that you love? I don't think many health professionals have quite figured this out yet.
Why are so many people leaving the NHS? It is a complex organisation, so it is a complex answer, but the data shows us some of the various reasons.
Enter Professor Sam Shah.
I think, certainly in the UK, there is a significant problem in the healthcare system where mediocre has almost become the norm.
Sam is the Chief Medical Strategy Officer of Newman, a world-leading online health provider. He was also previously the Director of Digital Development at NHS England and NHSX. And alongside this, he's been a dental surgeon, a public and digital health advisor for multiple different companies. He's a very well-known medical leader in the field. He's dabbled into a bit of law and consulting and everything else in between. It's safe to say that Sam is a master of career pivoting.
Everything has been very much about whatever opportunity happens to have come up at the time and the extent to which it's interested me.
So, what's his secret? This is what I'm trying to find out today. I sit down with Sam to discuss how he escaped the shackles of mediocrity within the NHS, how he broke the stereotypes and societal expectations, and he shares his top tips in career planning and how you can truly build a career that you love. As always, I hope you enjoy. Sam, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. So, you've accomplished so much in your career and you've held multiple different leadership roles. So, to begin with, I wanted to ask you, would you describe your career as meticulously planned out or more of an organic journey that's been marked by unpredictability?
So I would say my career to date, my journey has been anything but planned. Everything has been very much about whatever opportunity happens to have come up at the time and the extent to which it's interested me. And that really sort of reflects the last 20 or so years of my life between clinical practice, consulting, public health, clinical work, digital health, tech, law, and everything else. It's very much what has taken an interest at the time, how and where I might think it fits in, and really working out how I'm going to give it a go.
The reason I asked that question to begin with is because I think in today's era, a lot of people are quite hyper aware and switched on, and they know exactly where they want to be in 20 years' time. There's a hustle culture where people often set goals, they manifest where they would like to be. And I think there's somewhat of a chance of falling into this hyperoptimization paradox of playing this 4D chess move. So I wanted to get your thoughts on this because I know you said previously in another podcast that your career has been somewhat unpredictable. So talk to me a little bit about that and the two different concepts.
I don't think there's anything wrong with people planning. Planning is probably a good thing. It creates a sense of drive. People have something that they're working towards. But I always say plan, but plan also for the unexpected. Along that journey, on that plan, there might be something else that people will come across that they stumble upon, that they might like. An opportunity that presents that wasn't in the plan, but equally is a great opportunity. Most people end up with some extent of a portfolio career, and that's becoming more and more common. And certainly for me, I would say my interests outside of clinical work came very early. And as time went on, I managed to find a balance of doing both side by side. And sometimes these things weren't planned. Most of the time they weren't planned. Most of the time it's a case of having a conversation with somebody, someone saying, oh, this particular thing's coming up, or do you want to try this, or there's this new thing, and I'd give it a go. There are other times where it was more circumstance. I decided that I didn't like the thing I was doing at the time, so I wanted to change and give something else a go. I also found that sometimes interests were aligned in a different way to training pathways. Certainly as I was in public health, the expectation was that people would follow a very traditional public health pathway. My interest in public health was mainly health economics, health systems, and thinking about healthcare management. That wasn't very aligned to what public health specialist training was about. So I decided to go off to consulting, where it's much more acceptable. And I think the main thing is finding ways of entering those opportunities where it added to what I was doing rather than detracting. That wasn't always easy. And there are definitely times when I've done the opposite and ended up doing things where they've been super interesting, but they probably haven't been that helpful.
I think a lot of people are discouraged today from stepping out and following their curiosities or passion because there's an inherent belief that you're so bound by the structure of the system that it's difficult to leave it. And so as a result, a lot of people are feeling lost at the moment, uncertain. And so as someone that has pivot throughout their career into loads of different roles and embraced each sector, as you mentioned, what advice would you give those people?
The first thing I'd say to people is that none of us are being trained really to be lifelong workers in any one system. In the UK, that's hard to see, because in the UK, most of us as undergraduates are placed in our undergraduate training in an NHS type environment. Most of our academic environments as undergrads are typically attached to NHS hospitals. Most of our postgraduate training is also typically attached to NHS hospitals. That gives a sense that we're all being trained just to work in one system. The reality is the world is massive. The opportunities are absolutely massive. There are so many things we can do. So my first thing is remember, you're clinically trained, but you can apply your clinical skills in any environment you want to. If you decide to go and work for a big tech company as a clinical informatician, a pharma company, in consulting, in law, anywhere you want, you're able to do that if you want to do that. You don't have to do it. And for some people, it's great because they want to work in a certain environment. They might want to work in the NHS. That's fantastic. But equally, they might find there's another environment they want to try. And the first thing I would say is, don't be bound by the system, but really be bound by the opportunity you want to create. Think about what it is that you enjoy and where is it that that thing is. And you may not even know what you enjoy. In fact, for most of us, and certainly for me, I'm still trying to figure that one out. The first thing is don't really be too worried about changing and chopping to different parts of the system, because you can always go back if you want to. Despite what anyone says, there's such a shortage of clinicians. There's always an opportunity to go back to a traditional pathway if that's what suits you. But equally, don't be too worried if you go and try something else. I'll also say, try these alternatives earlier on in your career, not so much later. And the reason for that is purely a practical one. Often, when you switch, it's much more difficult to do so when pay differential becomes bigger. So try and do it earlier on when it's going to be less of a problem, rather than later when it may become more problematic. So that's like the first thing. The second thing, though, is don't be scared of trying different things. You might try a bit of consulting. You might try and do a bit of media, PR, or content in medicines or healthcare. You might even decide to go and work in a startup or other things. Like you may decide to go and work for a data company or in health tech or anywhere else out there. And there are so many options, more than any of us really get exposed to when we're undergrads. Certainly more than we probably get exposed to even in our early postgraduate training. And to talk to as many people as you can and find out what they liked about it, what they didn't like about it, what might suit you. And the other thing to remember is what might suit any of us as individuals may not suit somebody else, and vice versa.
What you just said there is really interesting, specifically around finding something you enjoy. And you said that you still haven't found that thing that you're fully passionate about. You're still on a mission to try and find it. And I'm not sure if you've read the book The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. He talks about entering this zone of genius and transitioning from the zone of excellence into the zone of genius. And I was fascinated by this concept, and I recently recorded a podcast with David Leif Rauff, who's the clinical excellence lead at Innovus. And the concept of Ikigai came up, which is all about finding something you love doing and you're passionate about, alongside something you're good at, something that makes the world a better place, and something that makes you money. Throughout your career, you've been trying to find your Ikigai, right? So tell me, where are you at the moment, Sam?
I love the concept of Ikigai because I think of this as almost like being like a North Star. It's something you might aspire to, but you may never get there, but it might be your driver along the way. At different points, at different things I've done, I would almost say that that might be the driver, and it's okay if it changes. There's a point at which I was really interested in elements of the law, protecting other clinicians and using it and supporting them through tribunals and other things, and that became a thing. There's another time when it became all about public health. There's another time where it's all about digital health. And I'd definitely say that now I probably blend all of those things. I wouldn't say that I'm still completely there, but I think the enjoyment is out of doing things that complement each other, that work towards it, but knowing that there is still something there for me to do in the future, and one day I might find it, I might come across it. But if I think of Ikigai as being more mythical, more aspirational than a state that I'm ever going to get to, it probably creates the driver to keep on doing different things.
And on your journey of finding this Ikigai, if you ever get there, would you say you've been following your curiosities or been following your passions? And is there a difference between the two?
I think there are times when there probably isn't a difference. There are probably times when there most certainly is a difference, but definitely both of those things. So for example, I was super curious about the law, but I was equally passionate about the law. So I decided to follow it and do it. I was definitely passionate about public health. How curious was I about it? Well, I became more curious about it as I did it. So there are different things like that that probably intertwine in different ways. Certainly something like digital health and tech, I'm both passionate about it and curious about it and will continue to be. And I know there's so much more to learn. I think you almost accept that at different states in which we exist, there'll be an extent to which you might be curious about something, you might be passionate about something, you might be neither of those things, and it might just be pure circumstance.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Naval Ravikant quote where he says, find something that feels like work to others but play to yourself. And so what was a point of realization where you had found that thing that felt like play to you, but other people around you were like, how are you doing this, Sam? You seem to be working so hard, but you're actually just playing, right?
Well, I think some people probably say that I'm still playing. I did have this conversation with my 6-year-old, and I said to her, Flora, what do you think I do? And she was like, well, you're a dentist, so you fix teeth. And I was like, but Flora, I don't actually go into the practice. And she was like, well, yeah, but you're still a dentist. I was like, yeah, I am. So what else do I do? She goes, well, you do the health thing with computers. I was like, okay, we're getting closer now. And it was really interesting because she had a view that my daughter, that I played with computers all day and somehow made people a little bit better through that. Maybe that is what I do. Who knows? I'm lucky enough that I work in a sector where every day I will learn something new. Sometimes it feels like really hard work. Other times it comes more naturally. Now you have to really work at this to sort of get better at it. But I would still say I'm in that phase where I'm learning to get better at it. Does it always feel like play? No. Might it seem like play to other people? Probably. I think the fun thing is learning something new and definitely demonstrating that and working with others so they learn about it too. And hopefully together with a group of people, it might seem more like play.
So in terms of finding your Ikigai, a lot of it is around trialing and failing, right? So you're going to have failures along the way. And I think quite a strong trait of a leader that I don't think is talked enough about in medicine is being open about these failures, learning from your mistakes and then bouncing back. And the reason I don't think it's talked about enough is because I think there is somewhat of a toxic perfectionist mindset that a lot of medics will have, and they don't like embracing that failure. So the question I'm getting at is, throughout your career you've had multiple successes, but why don't you talk a little bit about your failures as well?
I would say throughout my career I've probably had more failures than I have had successes, in my view. And I think it's really important that we learn to accept and embrace those failures. In medicine, in dentistry, in clinical training pathways, sometimes it's almost frowned upon to fail and talk about failure. On the one side, we're expected to reflect, almost self-flagellate in this reflection that takes place. On the other side, it's almost a taboo to put it out there. And there's lots of things mixed into that. There's things mixed into that about liability and people worrying about whether they'll be liable for something, whether their regulator is going to come after them, how they'll progress through training. So that sort of goes hand in hand with that issue. There's the issue of how it reflects on a trainer if someone says that they failed and they get labeled as a trainee in difficulty. All of these things I think are really unhealthy in the way that we really go about training in medicine and dentistry. And certainly when I was a training program director, I tried to take a different approach with those that I was working with. And I think of it like this: it's a two-way learning area. And we learn far more from the things that don't go well than from the things that necessarily always go well. And someone once taught me about the use of different ways of bringing those things out and creating a safe space to have those conversations. And so the first thing I would say for anyone that is serious about learning from things that don't go well, find that safe space. That safe space could be a therapist, it could be another group of friends, it could be a group of peers, but a small group where you can have those discussions and provide constructive challenge and feedback to each other without feeling judged, without feeling like something's going to go wrong from having that conversation. That's really important. And these days for me, and it changes, there are different groups, and there are some groups, a group of sort of medical director equivalents that I'm very close to, where we will have those conversations in a safe space about things that don't go well on a day-to-day basis, bounce off each other, learn off each other, take each other's soundings, and sometimes take each other's criticisms as well. And that is helpful. But one thing we have to do is learn almost to accept that failure is part of the natural course that we're going to go through. Things are not going to be perfect. And we do need to teach people, especially people who, like many of us in this area, will have gone to school, done really well, often been top of their class in lots of things, gone then into med school where they're also hyper competitive, and then come out the other side into what is the real world of working where things don't always go to plan. And unfortunately, the crash happens at that point because people aren't used to learning from failure, from failing, from really picking themselves up after it. So we have to teach people to do this a lot earlier and make it acceptable. The other thing that comes alongside that is learning how to work with other people and share some of those things. But the interesting thing for me has been that most of the failings I've had haven't just been in healthcare, they've been in other areas. They've been in shipping, they've been in retail technology, they've been in law, they've been in all sorts of other areas. And I would say I've probably learned from the collective of those failings that have probably shaped how I deal with things now. And I'm definitely much more thoughtful about how I do things now than I probably was 20 years ago. I take a lot more time to think about them, working through the implications, thinking through the different things that will happen as I make certain decisions. Now, you can also overanalyze sometimes, and everyone is at risk of doing that. Part of it is what is going to make progress happen? What is going to get to a better outcome? And what is it that success might look like if I get to the other side? Knowing and planning for the fact that a few things will go wrong along the way, and building in the contingency, the space, the mental capacity and space for things going wrong. And that's something we're not used to doing. I'd certainly recommend people, when you're planning anything, almost plan a little bit of time and space to think back for when things are going to go wrong, because they will.
And I think another problem is there's this creativity conundrum in medicine I want to try and break. And it's where I feel like almost creativity and open, free thinking isn't really allowed or celebrated. And I myself, I'm an aspiring young medical leader that genuinely wants to drive positive change. And I've noticed already early in my career that it almost feels like it's better to be a cog in a broken system than to think of these new creative ways and fun ways to fix the system and make it better. And so this question might be a little bit deep, a little bit philosophical, Sam, but would you say that in the current healthcare system, mediocrity is celebrated?
Anyone that knows anything I've either said or read some of the things I've written about or heard me speak at other things, I think certainly in the UK, there is a significant problem in the healthcare system where mediocre has almost become the norm. The norm in terms of how large parts of the system operate, the norm in terms of the people that in some cases are leading the system, and the norm around who is appointed and who is asked to run the system. And that for me is a big problem, because if we want to see a change in the outcome, and we want to see a change in the lives of people who are using the health system, carrying on doing things in the same way, often in a mediocre way, is not going to be the solution. But unfortunately, a lot of the decision making is done in exactly the same way by the same people who belong to the same club. And I do think this is a problem. Now, some people won't like me saying this because, of course, I've had to work with some of those people when I was in the system. And it's hard, but it's only when I've been completely outside and I step back and I look back in, you very much realise that certainly the highest level of decision making, and I mean at the top of the NHS, this is a significant problem, and it pervades throughout that health system, and it doesn't exist in every health system. And okay, there's an extent to which it exists everywhere in the world and everything, but it doesn't have to. Now, part of the problem is that we've got a system which is almost got baked into it a club mentality, where the same people from the same club are given the jobs, and they're given jobs to each other, and they're all pretty much from a very similar background, trained in the same way, stick together, and there is this group mindset. And this group think basically means that we end up with very similar people. And people that think outside the box, that think differently, struggle to fit into that. And often they're almost made to feel like they're wrong. that their different opinion is not the way that they should operate, that there's certain conformism that they need to sort of adhere to. Now, these things, on the one side, this diversity of thought, diversity of approach is important. On the other side, it's almost not celebrated because it doesn't fit in with what the system wants. The systems survive. The NHS, the UK health system, will survive. But it will survive in a way which is almost to protect the status quo. And that almost maintains that mediocrity. And that is a problem. It's a significant problem. Until that changes, the population is not going to get a different outcome. What we see instead is the optimism bias that goes alongside that. A lot of well-meaning people thinking they can make small changes, hoping for a different outcome, and it doesn't come. All it is pen pushing and hate pushing that takes place.
Yeah, it's a fantastic answer. I was recently listening to a panel discussion which was led by Dr. Junaid Bajwa, who is the Microsoft Chief Scientist Officer. And he was talking about the foundation of all innovation is diversity, and innovation is fueled by our ideas, and it's imperative that these ideas are birthed from a medley of diverse perspectives, backgrounds and thoughts. And so why is it that big tech corporations are beginning to get this right, the likes of Microsoft, Google, but there's a perceived lack of diversity and inclusivity within hierarchical structures like the NHS?
Really fascinating. I think a couple of things here. If we look at these big tech corporations, they understand and value the bottom line and the outcome they're going to achieve. They almost look at that above and beyond all of the other more perhaps structural and systemic issues. And so they will generally recruit for talent. That's not always the case and hasn't always been the case, but more so now we see this than before, where lots of large organizations are making efforts to recruit people with the right skills. Now, when we have this blend, where we get people with the right skills who come in, who can make a difference and achieve an outcome, that organization, that corporation, that tech giant or that pharma giant is more likely to get what it wants. And they're beginning to see this and realize it. But take a system like the NHS. It's steeped in bureaucracy. It is controlled by central government. It still lives on a system of policy levers and controls from the top to the bottom. There isn't much space for creativity in that. It doesn't matter what anyone tells me any day of the week about new structures and people having more autonomy. It doesn't exist. It exists in a political cycle, which is a short cycle. That short cycle relies on people towing the line and doing whatever they've been asked to do by the minister of the day. And that means you need conformist people that are going to toe the party line and do what they're asked, whether or not that is the right thing, whether or not that is a different thing. Effectively, there is no space for creativity in that. Now, that's almost at odds with some of the ideas of health innovation that are put out there. But right now, we see a system that is cash-strapped. It is a system that is very close to the end of a political cycle. It is a system that on the one side wants to make change happen, on the other side has no capacity to do that. That means there's no point in getting the most creative people, the people that are probably even most disruptive. That is a system that almost wants the most conformist people who are most likely to toe the party line and do what they're asked of them. And sadly, that doesn't mean we're going to get diversity of thought. So I think the big difference is the outcome. And here, at the moment, we've got a system, the outcome is maintain the status quo versus tech, retail, e-commerce, private healthcare, the world outside, which is thinking not only about the outcome for the citizen or the user, but also how it adds to the bottom line. Two very different sets of outcomes. One, which is really maintaining a public sector system that gives people the perception that they're getting something, but really what they're getting is a very efficient process, and I wouldn't even say today it's even that efficient, versus the other side, where you're driving value, and that value is adding to the bottom line.
It's interesting, and I think I've been privileged in the different positions I've been able to take on early on in my career, and I've seen the lack of diversity at the top. It is almost like an old boys club where people will look out for themselves. And I guess what I'm getting at is you're a perfect example, someone that was deeply rooted working in the NHS as the digital transformation officer of NHS England, right, and NHSX, and then stepped out because of these challenges that we're talking about. And it's a prime example of the NHS losing talent and impact because they aren't designing the sectors to make progress happen and to nurture the support and talent. So what is your perspective on how we can work from the ground up to change and nurture the next generation of talent?
I think we need to train people and train them in a way that allows them to have portfolio careers. Give them the sense that they can, of course, achieve and do anything, but create people that have got that ability to work in different environments, different settings, recognize the different pressures and factors in those environments. You need to teach people who also understand and train them where they recognize the balance between commercial organizations and non-commercial organizations. That in itself is a skill set. And not everyone likes that, and some people almost frown upon that and look at it like it's problematic. So I think the thing here is really training people that have that broad set of skills, right? Where they can basically try and use their skills in different ways. That's the first thing. The second is creating opportunities. And those opportunities come in different ways. One way you could do that is by giving people the option of shadowing people. They can shadow people, they can get those sort of mentoring opportunities, reverse mentoring. They kind of help. They give people an opportunity to get exposure to those kind of roles and things they can do in order to step up. The other thing is very early on exposing people to different career opportunities, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. And also helping people understand that their career may not just be one thing, may not just be clinical, it may be a mixture of management and clinical, and making that more acceptable, that it shouldn't be frowned upon.
So are we lacking a quantity of medical leaders, or are we lacking a quality of medical leaders that are willing to stick their neck on the line and make decisions?
I don't think there's probably a lack of them. There are probably lots of people out there. I think what we probably don't have is the opportunity to give them the space to operate. That's probably the first thing. We have another problem, which is we don't really have a pathway for those clinical medical leaders to get into those senior roles. Even if they have the skill set and the desire to do it, we haven't really created the route for them to do it. And the other thing that goes alongside this is we haven't really done anything that necessarily creates the next cadre of those leaders and gives them the training and experiential opportunities to get there. We have some schemes, but not enough. And we have to recognize that it's not also a sort of homogenous space. Some people might want to be digital health leaders, others might want to be strategic leaders, some might want to lead healthcare organizations. These all require different skill sets, which are very different. And so I don't think there's a lack of people that want to do it, but the opportunity to get there is probably the more difficult thing.
When someone asks me when I'm on my placement in hospital, what am I looking to do beyond medical school, beyond foundation posts, I sometimes hesitate to say that I'm interested in a portfolio career, interested in a leadership career, interested in content creation in healthcare, because I think it's looked down upon by those medical purists. It's almost like you're a traitor, you're leaving the NHS. So as someone that has left the NHS and probably experienced those negative comments, what's your comment on that? Maybe talk a little bit about the reason why you left and then the aftermath.
Well, look, a lot of people will be thinking about leaving the system at different points. I don't think they should worry about it. Ultimately, they're trained to deliver healthcare, deliver health, make people better. There's about 100 ways of doing that. One is to work in the NHS. There are so many other ways of doing that. You can work in pharma, develop some drugs. You can work in consulting, help change a health system. You might decide to work in private healthcare and treat a different group of patients. There is nothing wrong with working in any other part of the health system if that is what you want to do. And people should find a way to support you doing it and to make the choices that work for you. And that's the first thing to say. The second thing though is of course there will be people that haven't made those decisions themselves and are scared about other people making them. I find a lot of this fear often comes from ignorance. That's okay, we can understand that because not everyone gets to experience everything. But the important thing is there are options. And those options include also going back to a system. And what I find is a lot of people work now in both systems. They'll work in the NHS, they'll work outside the NHS, they might come back to the NHS, you take things, you learn things. And it's like any other sector. The more experience you get, the more you take to the next place. So we should almost embrace the opportunity for people to work inside and outside the system. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. Now for me, right now, I still do a bit of both. I work predominantly outside of the NHS, but I still do a little bit in the NHS. And I always find the two things complement each other. There are certain things I learn in NHS environments, whether it's about new policy or other things taking place, that I take to my other settings. And equally, there are things I learn in my other settings that I take to the NHS. From my perspective, both work together, side by side. And it's really important that we recognize that those sort of opportunities shouldn't be exclusive, and nor are they really the sorts of things where we have to worry that people are going to disappear from the system, or suddenly they're never going to come back. They might do. And we've got to make the NHS or any other setting attractive to people to work there. We've got to make sure the pay, the term, the conditions are attractive. Create an environment where people want to be there, not where they feel forced to be there. Give people opportunities where they're going to learn. And if we think about the reasons people go somewhere else, how can we create that environment or recreate that environment in our own spaces? So I always say to people, 1, don't be scared of leaving. 2, don't be scared of going back. But embrace the range of opportunities and make sure they're taking you forwards.
Yeah, it's fantastic advice. And this podcast is all around inspiring the future of healthcare, and specifically the future of healthcare's workforce, getting them to think outside the box, embracing creativity. And another thing that I'm passionate about is also helping clinicians make better decisions. So I think a lot of medical leaders are hesitant when it comes to making decisions, because obviously medicine and healthcare, the downsides of getting something wrong is difficult. How can we train clinicians to make better decisions and be okay with getting a decision wrong but learning from that decision?
First thing is helping people understand risk. You have to be able to assess risk and the implications of decisions you're going to make. That's kind of the first thing. The second thing is, remember, you're not alone. Share the decision. Talk to other people that have made similar decisions. Get a view from somewhere else. It's okay to ask for help. In fact, I'd say I probably spend more time now asking my team and others for their opinion on things than I did before. That might still mean I make a decision, but it's always good to sound it out with others as well. That's all right too. And there's another part of it. Think about the implications of decisions we make. None of our decisions are binary, and at the end of the day, they will always have downstream impacts. Try and work those through, learn what they might be, and in the moment, be clear about why you're making a decision. But the worst thing is not making a decision. Very often in healthcare, we don't want to get involved in things. We don't want to make decisions. I actually say, learn to embrace decision making, as long as we do it in a way that's informed, it's as collective as it can be, and it's thought through around the risk.
In my experience, if a task gets dumped on you, it's expected to be done as soon as possible, despite maybe it being non-urgent, non-important. So I wanted to ask you, are you familiar with the Eisenhower matrix? And the reason I ask you is because I think this concept can be applied to making decisions in healthcare to drive unstoppable change. And so it'll be interesting to get your perspective on that, Sam.
I think the Eisenhower matrix is a very useful way of managing day-to-day tasks, operational tasks, and workload. It's a great way of really prioritizing what to focus on and what not to focus on. Absolutely fantastic. And it's a good way of doing that. There are lots of other frameworks too, and that's one that many people use and is quite helpful. But before we get as far as applying that matrix, I'll almost take a step back. For whatever the project, the event, the particular program is, especially in a leadership role, I'd say to anyone who's in a leadership role, first of all, the first question we'll be asking is, what is the strategy? Where do they want to get to and why? Because before working out which tasks are urgent, non-urgent, which ones should be done, which ones should be delegated, you have to really work out, how does this fit into the strategy and how does it fit into the role that the individual has? The second thing that you have to do in order to make something like an Eisenhower framework work is you have to also know what your resources are. There's no point in working out things you're going to do if the resources don't exist. All too often in healthcare, people are doing things for which there's no resources, whether it's an audit, a strategy, whether it's some sort of assessment, some review, something. They're almost doing it out of goodwill. Actually, I'd say that's problematic. We have to work out, is that the resource to make the change, to do the thing, to implement a particular way of working, innovation, to make it effective? If there's not, put it in the don't do bucket, but you have to know the resourcing. The third thing that you have to be able to do, and this sort of touches on the framework, but not quite, is know the organization, the design of it, in which you're going to perform this task. If that is not clear to you, do not perform the task. Do not do it. The decision you're making there is not to do it. You need to understand the environment you're operating in and how that decision is going to flow through and what it's going to do. But if you don't, then don't make the decision. In fact, your decision is not to decide.
Sam, as we close up the podcast, what would be your message for inspiring the future of healthcare? Those medical leaders, those aspiring medical leaders that are listening to this conversation, what would you say to them?
First thing is you can do anything. If you want to do something, give it a go. Don't be scared of it. Try it out. You can always go back. The next thing is talk to as many people as you can. Talk to people in different sectors, in different industries, different parts of healthcare. Get different perspectives. And you'll be surprised. Most people whose doors you knock at will be willing to speak to you at some point. They might not do it immediately, but they do it at some point. And remember, none of us have all the answers. Talk to other people. They will share their experiences, their failures, and you'll definitely learn. But above all else, try and have fun while you're doing it.
Sam, it's been my pleasure having you on the podcast, and thank you so much for joining me.
It's been a real pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for getting to the end of the episode. Please consider leaving a review on iTunes and subscribing on YouTube. It really helps the channel to grow and means the world to me. Until next time, and see you soon.